Welcome to Undivided. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. And we have a lot of work to do in that regard after the elections on Tuesday. There's still some races that are outstanding, not only in Washington state, but across the country. But there are some significant races that had been up in the air that we're now starting to see concessions in, or at least candidates declare victory. One of the big races we've been watching is the 8th Congressional District in Washington state. It had been a swing seat, or at least considered a swing seat. I'm not sure if it'll continue to be considered a swing seat after this. For years, it was a Republican seat, flipped to Democrats in 2018, and now it looks like Congresswoman Kim Schreier is going to hold on to the seat for a third term. She has declared victory against Republican challenger Matt Larkin, and, you know, her campaign, they noted that Republicans spent a lot of money trying to get this seat back and a lot of money to no avail. So if you're not familiar with the 8th Congressional District in Washington, it lies just east of Seattle in the suburbs of Seattle. But it's always been a fascinating district because it's split in half by the Cascade Mountains. And so you have this chunk of the district that's rural, and then you have a chunk of the district that's suburban. And I think that balance is what makes it traditionally a swing seat. But Congresswoman Schreier declaring victory, saying, "I'm honored to represent this district once again in Congress. This election was a choice about who this district wants as their voice in the other Washington. I'm thrilled that our work to bring down costs, protect a woman's right to choose, and support local police resonated with people across the 8th District. I'm going to take a little bit of umbrage with the statement that she supports local police. I don't ever think she was anti-police, but obviously in her campaign, like a lot of Democrats did, she leaned into this idea of being pro-police when back in 2020, when police needed support, needed vocal support from their members of Congress, from their local elected leaders, they weren't getting it here. And so I do think it's a little disingenuous to, at the last hour, act like you're pro-police funding, when even if you had been all along, you stayed silent when it mattered the most. And so I'm bothered by that in particular. But her campaign going on to say, this is her campaign spokesperson, Republicans attacked the Congresswoman on the airwaves for months and Democrats attacked Republicans on the airwaves for months as well, let's be honest, and spent over $8 million in their efforts to flip this seat with nothing to show for it. The voters of the 8th District made it clear who they want representing them. This decisive victory proved there is, if I have to keep adding some context, I don't think it was necessarily decisive. She's only ahead by a couple percentage points. This decisive victory proved there is no one better suited for the job than Kim. And I've been clear, I like Kim Schreier. She's a very nice woman. I've had the pleasure to sit down with her for interviews many times since she first ran in 2018. And I also said from the beginning that I thought Matt Larkin was perhaps too conservative for the 8th Congressional District. And I think that these results show that. He did have an opinion on abortion in particular that was outside the mainstream in Washington, even in a district that's half suburban, half rural. He would not say that he was opposed to a national abortion ban. In fact, personally, he said that he was opposed to exceptions for even cases of rape and incest. And so in an election where it's looking like the abortion issue did play a factor in Republicans not doing as well as they were expected to do, someone who would not rule out supporting something that banned abortion, even in extreme instances, I'm not surprised that he wasn't able to pull it off. I think, and this is nothing against Matt Larkin, but I think had Republicans coalesced behind a single candidate pre-primary, a candidate that was a little bit more moderate, that the results would have been different. You had Jesse Jensen, who ran for this seat in 2020, got no help, no spending from national Republicans, basically did it on his own, and he almost won. So he runs again this year, and then you get Reagan Dunn, who has a lot of name recognition, jumps in at the 11th hour. Reagan and Jesse split the vote, and it sends Matt Larkin, someone who is probably too conservative to represent the district or to win, forward. So that's something to consider. It seems like a theme with Republicans just not being able to quite get it together. Another race we've been watching closely. I have a lot to say about this one, a lot of frustrations around this one. I've been putting my thoughts on paper for an op-ed, the race for Secretary of State in Washington. This was fascinating from the beginning because you had a nonpartisan who was running in the race. And that's near and dear to my heart. I've been very clear that I'd like to break free from this political duopoly that we have. And I think anyone who wants to run for a major political office without the backing of a major political party has some guts, because you do that without the infrastructure behind you of a major political party, and that's not an easy thing to do. So Julie Anderson has conceded this race. She has conceded that she has lost this race to Democrat Steve Hobbs, who was appointed to fill that position by Governor Jay Inslee. He's a Democrat, and it looks like he will move forward as Washington's Secretary of State. I want to read part of Julie Anderson's concession. She says she trusts the election results. She said, I knew this would be a tough race, but believed strongly it needed to be run. Voters deserved to have the choice of an experienced elections administrator without party strings attached. While many voters made that choice, it wasn't quite enough. I want to thank all the people who supported me, my vision for the office of the Secretary of State, and my unconventional campaign. The support of Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters kept me going every single day. The campaign is now over. It's time to govern. I've already called Secretary Hobbs to wish him the best as he leads this very important office. I stand ready to assist the office of Secretary of State in any way. I ask my supporters to do the same. You know, I think one of the many things that frustrates me about this race, and it really had, again, it had nothing to do with Steve Hobbs. I think Steve Hobbs is a fine person. I think he's a good politician. He's a moderate. He isn't completely beholden to his party. But there was no question that Julie Anderson was the more qualified candidate. She's been running elections for years. Prior to him being appointed to the job by Governor Inslee, Hobbs had never done an election. So that was part of it. And I think you see here that this was about the letter next to someone's name, which I wish we could get past this surface level, like, oh, it's a Democrat, so I might as well vote for him, and actually look into a candidate's qualifications for the job. But beyond that, as you guys know, Republicans ran a write-in campaign. Republican State Representative Brad Klippert at the 11th hour. Republicans had their chance to be in this race in a serious way, pre-primary. The problem is too many people ran as Republicans, they split the vote, and that's what allowed Julie Anderson to move through as a nonpartisan. So I'm sorry, but Republicans should have got their shit together pre-primary. Instead, they jump in at the 11th hour, and Brad Klippert, by the way, I should just note, let me pull this up because I was frustrated by, and I think my theory proved true, which is Brad Klippert would edge Julie Anderson out and steal votes from Julie Anderson, which I think is the case here because Brad Klippert has about 85,000 write-in votes. And that's more than the difference between Julie Anderson and Steve Hobbs. And I'm not saying all of those write-ins would have otherwise gone to Julie Anderson, but I bet a big chunk of them would have. And also, I mean, I'm sorry, Brad Klippert and the people who ran his campaign, but 85,000 votes does not a successful write-in campaign make. And we knew this all along. You can't win a statewide office as a write-in candidate. It's nearly impossible. And so because Republicans were angry that they didn't get anybody past the primary, they cost Julie Anderson this election. And I'm confident in that. And I'm not saying that Republicans don't have a right to be able to vote for someone who they actually believe in. But what you've done is you've given Democrats a seat that they've wanted for years and years and years. So I have a lot of frustrations about this, and it goes, again, back to my just dislike of the two-party system, and you've got this qualified woman who had support from people on both sides who couldn't win because her challenger had a freaking letter next to his name that people prefer. I mean, isn't that just ridiculous? We have to be able to get back past that. I don't know what it's going to take, but I give a lot of credit. And I have I've been in contact with Julie Anderson today. She is interested in coming on the show to talk about her thoughts about the campaign, about being vilified by Democrats so they could win, which I think was particularly egregious. And so I look forward to talking to her, but I give her all the credit in the world for trying to run a campaign on her merits, on her qualifications, and not relying on a little letter next to her name to push her through. Another race I want to talk about quickly. There's been a lot of stuff that's been in flux this week, but again, we're getting these concessions. I told you from the beginning this was the most important race in Washington state because I thought it would set a tone for public safety. Well, the results were very surprising. Jim Farrell, who's the mayor of Federal Way, who's been very outspoken about the crime crisis, about the need for enhanced accountability, Jim Farrell has conceded that race to Lisa Mannion, who's the longtime chief of staff in the prosecutor's office, who was generally believed to prefer pathways to avoid, putting people in prison or to avoid, I guess, how I would characterize it, max accountability for your crimes. So Jim Farrell put out a very kind concession. He says this afternoon, I called Lisa Mannion to congratulate her on her historic election as King County prosecuting attorney. This was a spirited and hard-fought campaign, and I am incredibly thankful to my loving family, friends, and supporters who put in the work to carry our message to every corner of King County. The people have spoken, and I wish Lisa success as she takes on the serious challenges facing our entire region. Lisa Mannion also put out a statement talking about kind of the path forward in this race. And I will say about Lisa, I wish she had come on the show. You know, we did invite her on the show during the election, so maybe we'll be able to chat with her post-election. But she put out a statement saying, I'm honored to have earned the trust of King County voters. I'm looking forward to serving as your next King County prosecuting attorney and want to thank Mayor Jim Farrell for calling to congratulate me. I'm committed to working with leaders throughout King County to ensure that all of our communities are safe and supported and to build a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety and promotes racial equity. So we will see how she does. I will say I've heard from a couple prosecutors in the office who are not happy with this result, who feel like this is going to be the status quo. They have these huge case backlogs already. They feel like there isn't direction in the office and that Lisa Mannion, who's been the chief of staff for so many years, won't represent any sort of significant change. I also wonder with morale among prosecutors at an all-time low, and that's the characterization from at least 2 senior deputy prosecuting attorneys in the office, I wonder if this will lead people to leave. I mean, we've said this so many times, and it's the reason why you don't get a lot of judicial challengers and candidates as well. When you're an attorney, you can make a lot more money in the private sector. And so these people who are just doing this slog through these caseloads of homicides and rapes and you name it, and just crushed under a backlog of cases, some of them don't believe in the person in charge. Why wouldn't you just eject from that job and go get something that's going to pay you big bucks? So I guess we'll see what happens with the prosecutor's office. I also found it odd that, not too long ago, was it just last year? Yeah. Seattle voters elected a Republican city attorney. And so I thought, well, gosh, if Ann Davison was elected as a Republican in Seattle, people must be incredibly fed up with the crime crisis. And so I thought Jim Farrell, even though he's not a Republican, he was clearly the more moderate of the 2 options for King County prosecutor. I thought, well, for sure, if they elected Ann Davison, Jim Farrell is a shoo-in. And so it's just odd. This is just a different result. And some people are saying, well, Ann Davison won because it was an off-year election, and had she had to run on an on-year, more people would have showed up and she would have lost, which thank God, because remember who Ann Davison's opponent was? It was Nicole Thomas Kennedy, an absolutely insane police abolitionist who had, during 2020, called cops pigs, celebrated arson at the youth jail. And it's like, if an off-year election is the only thing that stopped that crazy woman from being in charge of the city's criminal justice system, well, thank God. So yeah, I'm concerned about the results in the King County prosecutor's race. I do hope that Lisa Mannion sees the state of things and does commit herself and the office to really making sure that criminals are aware that there is accountability waiting for them at the end of their crime, because that is one of the most critical things to improving our public safety crisis. Of course, the big election story from Tuesday was actually out of Florida, which is great because we happen to have a Friday segment called Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Joining us is our Florida-based correspondent, my sister Miranda. You are now in the middle of the most interesting political climate in America.
Yeah, I think Florida always brings something interesting to every election, but kind of switched gears on this one a little bit.
Yeah, so let's start obviously by talking about Ron DeSantis and the race for governor. I think people knew he was going to win. This is a pretty big blowout. And you actually looked at, when you compare it, and I think it's particularly interesting, when you compare it to the results back in, was it 2018?
2018, yeah.
Yeah, because if you compare it to those results, he outperformed himself by a lot.
by a lot. Just in the state alone, I mean, he took 59.4% of the votes that are currently counted, and Chris only got 40%. That is a significant margin of people. It's like 1.5 million voter difference. A huge gap compared to in 2018 when he ran against Andrew Gillum. It was only a 33,000 vote difference. It's 49.6% of the votes to DeSantis and 49.2% of the votes went to Gillum in 2018. So those numbers are significantly different.
Yeah, that's insane. I know Andrew Gillum was like supposed to be some Democratic superstar, and they poured a lot of money into that. But that is a significant result for Ron DeSantis. And I've been talking about, we talked about on Florida Pro as well, that it was predicted that Ron DeSantis would win for the first time for a Republican governor in 20 years, Miami-Dade County. And not only did he win Miami-Dade County, but again, when you compare it to 2018, it's significant. Give us those numbers.
For Miami-Dade County, DeSantis took 55.3% of the votes and Chris took 44% of the votes. So that's a huge significant difference compared to in 2018 when he ran against Gillum. It was Gillum took 59.9% of the votes and Ron DeSantis only took 39% of the votes. So that is another huge difference for Miami-Dade County, which is pretty historically a blue county. That is a huge swing towards the Republican support.
Well, for any county to swing that much in 4 years, like I can see over like 12 years seeing a shift in the electorate. That's significant. What are you hearing from folks there about? Because I know Donald Trump, it sounds like there's some mixed opinions, but he's still, I mean, moving forward with announcing a 2024 bid, also from Florida, from Mar-a-Lago. I mean, did you hear any chatter about what people there think of these two Floridians and who should run for president?
Yeah, I think in Florida, you're going to have a lot more support for DeSantis, mainly because we've seen his politics in action down here. We've been able to see results, and also on the other side of things, some things that don't work out. But I think because of like DeSantis's handling of the last 4 years, the pandemic, all the social issues that kind of came up, he kept our state pretty safe, pretty open, pretty free. And I think that a lot of people, and from what I hear, even some of my close friends that were a little more Trump supporters, now that DeSantis is thinking about running, I truly believe that DeSantis will take Florida if he runs for president too, even as a governor. I think people just really enjoy him.
Yeah, his star is on the rise. I can't imagine Trump's too pleased about that. I had to laugh though. There was this Sun Centennial, and it was an op-ed. It was in the editorial board, but this is so funny because in our state we saw it like the complete opposite. Like I think that this was the election that showed that I don't know if Republicans here can win statewide office again. I mean, the Democratic results here were really good. It was not the case in Florida. And the Sun Centennial editorial board called it an epic Democratic collapse. And what was the other for a crimson hellscape?
A crimson hellscape.
I like that. And did they go back and edit it? Is that what I read? Because people were so pissed off.
Yeah, they went back in and changed hellscape to landscape. They didn't, make any remarks about the change. They just went and changed it. I guess they maybe weren't too happy with the way that came across to a lot of people, because Florida is so far from a hellscape, and you can't do that to this beautiful state, regardless of politics and how you feel about it.
Really quickly, I just wanted to mention all of this, meanwhile, and there was this hurricane, Nicole, that just pops up in Florida. Did that have an impact at all on elections or anything like that?
I honestly don't know if it really had an impact on elections, because obviously the election day was earlier this week, maybe on some final votes coming out of the counties that were affected, but it didn't hit until early Thursday morning or like 1 a.m. Here in Miami, we didn't really feel anything. But it did cause some significant damage to like houses along the coast in Vero Beach, along with some Airbnbs, hotels, and some other businesses. So there is actually some significant damage because it did hit as a Category 1. It kind of came out of nowhere, and we don't really get November storms like this. I think this is like maybe the fourth in history to hit the United States in November. The last one was in like the 30s. So this is a very rare occurrence. I mean, we get a lot of tropical weather, but for it to actually form into a hurricane this late in the game, it's a little out of nowhere. It canceled my camping plans for the weekend.
Yeah, it also apparently, I mean, 5 people were killed in Nicole, so it was a serious storm, but it unearthed a Native American burial site, which is interesting.
It did. Some beachgoers, Floridians love to get out after the storm clears and just check out the beaches, because you do find some very interesting things that wash up during the storm surge. And it unearthed what they are believing to be a Native American burial ground. They found a few human skeletons and some other odds and end bones in one area. And they had some crime scene investigators come out and forensic people to look at it. And they estimate the bones to be like 200 years old. So they're assuming that they're probably Native American. And I guess they're going to probably have to do some research on that site to see if they have to like clean it up and put them back or something. I don't really know what happens when you find stuff like that. So,
well, a real hurricane in Florida, a political hurricane. We'll be relying on you heavily as we see what happens with Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. Miranda, thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a good weekend.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
One thing that we haven't really covered on the show this week, I think it was just because so much was going on with elections, was this shooting at Ingram High School in North Seattle. It was tragically what police are calling a targeted incident. So the suspect is 14 and allegedly shot another student over some kind of personal beef that was going on. So that's tragic. One thing I did appreciate is the chief of police coming out and saying, hey, that we have record crime rates. And he kind of made it sound like, yeah, this is all of that spilling over, the crisis that we're already dealing with on our streets at a much larger scale, kind of spilling over into this school. So there has been an Instagram post circling on the line, as one does. It's since been removed. Thank you to my friend Nicole Thompson over at the Dory Monson Show, who snagged it in time to give it to me. It was from a teacher at Ingram High School who was there, obviously, with his kids in their classroom when this happened. I'm going to read his post word for word, curse words and all, because I want you to get a good understanding of what the man said, and then we will discuss. So he put a picture of his kids in the class sort of circled around. It says, "This is a picture of my students and I in lockdown today after a student with a gun shot another student multiple times in the hall about 50 yards from my classroom. That poor kid is dead. My students were amazing in this horrible situation. I did okay too. But this shouldn't have to have happened at all. Our unwillingness as a nation to do anything about our gun problem is maddening and psychotic. If you didn't vote blue today, f*** you. The only way to stop this madness is to vote progressive so that we can have a minuscule chance to change gun laws in this country. I'm in the anger stage of grief at the moment. I'm not going to argue about this. I'm done. As a teacher, I've been done for years on this topic, but now it's happened to me personally, and I'm raging. Guns are the problem, period." Okay. First, I feel terrible for this teacher and for his students. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. I feel awful for him. I mean, what a terrible situation to go through, not only scared for yourself, scared for the kids that you are responsible for in that moment. I can only imagine what he went through. So, part of me wants to give him a little bit of leeway because he went through a situation that is unimaginable for those of us who haven't been through it. And I don't know what state he was in when he posted this. So I just want to talk about that feeling that he's expressing. Because absent what happened to him and what happened to his students, that is a common sentiment from the left that, if you didn't vote blue, f*** you, in regards to the issue around guns. But in Seattle in particular, I think there's a couple problems with this. So first of all, this happened on election day, and it feels a lot to me like making this incident, which was between two students, political, which I don't particularly like. But again, giving him the benefit of the doubt. Seattle has been a progressive city for as long as I've been here, more than 10 years, longer than that. Besides our current city attorney, who is an anomaly when it comes to Republicans. I mean, she was a Democrat for a long time, switched to Republican Party, won the city's top prosecutor. Besides her, Republicans in leadership positions in Seattle is a complete anomaly. In King County, it's an anomaly. And the state of Washington, Democrats have been in charge for a long time. Democrats have been in charge of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office and still not been able to push through gun reform, quote unquote, gun reform laws that have come up, which is not the fault of Republicans. So I take issue with the fact that in one of the most progressive cities in America, you believe that voting progressive could have prevented this from happening. If being in a progressive area could have prevented this from happening, then this wouldn't have happened because you're in the city of Seattle. So I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Also, there are gun laws that prevent, or prohibit rather, a 14-year-old kid from bringing a gun to school. 14-year-olds aren't allowed to have firearms. So I don't understand, I guess, what gun law you are thinking of that could have prevented this from happening, because the child already broke a number of laws in doing what he did. A, he had a gun when legally he's not able to have one. B, he brought a gun to a school where legally he's not allowed to have one. And C, he used that gun to kill another child, which is obviously a crime. So we've got the trifecta for this 14-year-old of crimes committed. Each of those things is a law that's already on the books. So what this post from this progressive teacher tells me, and the only law I can think of that would prevent this, is for guns to be completely banned in the United States and for the government to go out and confiscate guns that are already in people's hands. Because again, 14-year-olds not allowed to have a gun. So there is no reasonable gun law that wouldn't completely abolish the Second Amendment to the Constitution that would prevent this from happening. And even then, I would argue a kid who wants to go to school, shoot someone in a hallway, and I don't know, think they could get away with it or just be fine going to prison, would probably stab the kid with something. I've said before that, look, you bring me a gun law that's common sense, and I'm fine with it. I mean, I'm really not, I believe deeply in our Constitution and the Second Amendment to our Constitution. I do agree in part with arguments that, look, we've come a long way on firearms since the Constitution was made, since the Second Amendment was created, and maybe it's time to revisit it a little bit. I'm always open to having conversations, but this makes no sense. This post makes no sense, and it vilifies anyone who dares to disagree. Yeah, the only way to stop this madness is to vote progressive so we can have a minuscule chance to change gun laws in this country. Now, if this teacher just supports abolishing the Second Amendment, that's another thing. But unless you have some grand idea that would prevent someone who's legally prohibited from owning a firearm from getting a firearm in another way, stealing a firearm from their parents, etc., then I really don't know where you're going with this. And also, when he says guns are the problem, period, let's evaluate what the true problem is. This is clearly a problem of parenting. And I think that is really the core of a lot of problems that we're seeing in this country. I don't know what this 14-year-old's home life was like, or is like, but to suggest that that doesn't have something to do with why he is, as a 14-year-old, carrying a gun to school to shoot someone. And the same is true for any student who commits a school shooting. I mean, there are some issues there, I think, at home. That's not to say that you can't be a really good parent and you have a child who does insane stuff for no reason and there's no making sense of it. But I think parenting is a big thing here, and really just who are the role models that these young people have in their lives. And also the degradation of interpersonal relationships, which is something I've talked about on the show a lot. These kids buried in their phone, on their video games. I sound like a curmudgeon, on their video games. And and not really being able to engage in conversations in a meaningful way, not being able to maintain interpersonal relationships with other human beings, I do think is a big part of the problem. So to say guns are the problem, period, if you're that narrow-minded, then we're never going to solve these crises. Yeah, we can talk about guns, but we got to talk about all this other stuff too. So again, I feel really bad for this teacher. I feel terrible for the students. Obviously, we feel awful for the child who died. And frankly, the 14-year-old who's going to spend a lot of time in prison. I don't know if he's going to be charged as an adult or not. But I just want to talk about this Instagram post because I think that sentiments like this really do get in the way of actually solving the problem and being honest about what the problem is. All right, coming up at the end of the show, we're going to see if some new election results are out in particularly one race I've been waiting for, Washington's 3rd Congressional District. That's why the show is coming to you a little late today. I told you guys in an earlier post on Patreon and Locals that we're going to wait until at least 6 to see if we could get some up-to-date results. This isn't a breaking news show, but I did want to, given ballot drops, try to get you the latest results. So I just want to let you know, coming up at the end of the show, we're going to see where WA 3 is at. Twitter, Elon Musk, I like Elon. I think he's funny for a billionaire and amusing, but also I like that he bought Twitter. I think he had a lot of good points about how it had really, I think there's one thing about removing, bot accounts and spam accounts and disinformation about elections, etc. But I thought Twitter had become a little too heavy-handed on controlling speech. And so I liked that Elon was going to come in and try to fix some of those issues with it. One of the big controversies lately with Elon Musk and Twitter that I've been talking about is his decision to do Twitter Blue, which means that if you've got $8 a month, you can have a little blue check mark next to your name. Now, I have a little blue check mark next to my name because when I was with Fox, they verified all of our accounts so that people knew, okay, this is the account of this person whose job it is to provide news. And I think that's important. But anyway, so basically Elon says that he thinks a way to cut down on Twitter bots is to make people pay for a verification and then prioritize people with the blue check in comments and trending and all of that stuff. But I have to say, I don't think this is going very well. And now it looks like Twitter Blue verifications are on pause because a major issue has arisen, and that is that people are creating imposter accounts. So they'll get a Twitter account verified and then they'll change the name on it. So a couple celebrities have done that and changed their name to Elon Musk. And then you've got a Twitter account that's been verified and then they change the picture to Elon Musk, the name to Elon Musk. And it's like, okay, well, that person already has a bunch of followers. So someone could easily mistake that for, Elon Musk's Twitter account. This one was interesting. This happened to Eli Lilly and Company, which is a pharmaceutical company. And that's not immediately what you'd think about when it's like, do I want to dupe a Twitter account? You wouldn't think of, let me create a fake account for a pharmaceutical company. But somebody, got verified, changed theirs to look like this pharmaceutical company's Twitter account, and then tweeted out that insulin was going to be free. Apparently this is the pharmaceutical company that produces a bunch of insulin. And so over on their actual real account, they're like, we're sorry for everyone who was duped by that, but insulin is not free. So people also impersonated Tesla, SpaceX, Nintendo, Lockheed Martin. There was a bunch of them. And this is problematic because the idea, even Elon Musk's purpose behind it, was to try to prevent, bots and things like that. And what it has ultimately done is allowed for people to create very high-profile, verified impersonation accounts. And that can be damaging, like I said, for some businesses like this. I'm not going to say poor pharmaceutical company because I never feel bad for pharmaceutical companies, but, who was impersonated saying insulin is free. I mean, I don't necessarily feel bad for the pharmaceutical company, but I do feel bad for anyone who needs insulin who saw that and was gleeful for a moment that their insulin might be free. So according to the Wall Street Journal, there was a brief, or the Huffington Post rather, there was a brief pause on the people signing up for Twitter Blue accounts. And so we'll see what they do to try to fix this problem. But Elon Musk said that one of the things he took to Twitter, because apparently this is another thing. Elon Musk has laid a bunch of people off, and reportedly he has laid off the communications division of Twitter, which obviously isn't great considering the media is trying to get a hold of Twitter about all the stuff that's going on. So one of the things Elon said that's going to happen, he said, going forward, accounts engaged in parody must include parody in their name, not just in their bio. He then went on to say, to be more precise, these are accounts doing parody impersonations. Basically, tricking people is not okay. So you can have an account that's clearly a parody account. Like I've had people start parody accounts of me, like to mock me. So you can do that if it's like a joke, but if you're trying to trick people, like in the case of that pharmaceutical fake account, he says that's not okay and you're going to be suspended. But there were so many of these that Twitter couldn't keep up with it. And apparently, and this is funny because on Elon Musk's tweet saying, going forward, accounts engaged in parody must include parody in their name, not just the bio, Twitter added a clarification to that, added a little asterisk to Elon Musk's tweet, which is interesting. It says, to avoid confusing others about an account's affiliation, parody, commentary, and fan accounts must distinguish themselves in both their account name and bio. The account name should clearly indicate that the account is not affiliated with the subject portrayed in the profile. So if you're going to try to pull that in, like, say, an Elon Musk parody account, you have to say, like, Elon Musk parody or fake Elon Musk. Like, that could be your Twitter handle. And then reiterate in the description that it is a fake parody account, or your account will not be allowed to exist. So we'll see what Twitter does from here, but you can't try to make Twitter a place that's more reliable, fewer bots, etc., but have this rampant verified impersonation situation going on. And there's a lot of people who obviously did this to kind of show Elon Musk, like, hey, this is a bad idea. So Elon Musk, he's having some struggles at Twitter right now, I think is a fair place to put it. Hopefully Twitter emerges from this a better place to disseminate information and to get information, but I think the verdict is out on this one. Okay, like I said, I'd been waiting. I thought maybe we'll do a little late on Friday because this is going to be, in Washington State at least, the last significant drop of ballots that we're going to have. Some will kind of trickle in, but I think that if you have candidates who are behind by, a couple percentage points or more at this point, they're just not going to be able to make up that deficit. So I had kind of wanted to wait until Congressional District 3 was decided or we knew, because there's so many fascinating elements of this race. So this was a district where the seat was long Republican, and it was held by Jamie Herrera Butler, who apparently made the unforgivable mistake of voting to impeach former President Donald Trump. So she was met by a pro-Trump challenger. His name is Joe Kent. And Joe Kent beat out Jamie Herrera Butler in the primary. So he advanced to the general election along with Marie Perez, a Democrat. Now, usually a Democrat, it'd be pretty hard for them to win this district. But because Joe Kent is so far to the right, because he is endorsed by former President Donald Trump, in a district that, was really on the margins, that can be off-putting for even some Republican voters and certainly for Democratic voters. So at this moment right now, and what I'm going to do is in the description to this episode, I'm going to put a link in there that will take you directly to the results for this congressional district so that you can update it and see, because this is really close right now. There is less than 10,000 votes between the two candidates, about less than 2 percentage points. And Clark County, which is the largest, most populous county, rather, in the 3rd Congressional District, is taking a little bit to release their results. Some other counties usually release them at 4, apparently not Clark County. So rather than keeping you guys super, super late on a Friday just to get results in this one congressional district, I will include a link in the description of this episode on Patreon and Locals. And if you're listening on podcast, just to make sure that you can easily click on something to be able to get the results here. But if Joe Kent cannot make this deficit up, if Joe Kent loses, I think that's a wake-up call for the Republican Party. We already talked on the show, I believe it was Wednesday, the subscriber-only episode, how the Republican Party needs to define itself. For voters who are independent and moderates, who the Republican Party in Washington needs to win, or else the math doesn't work, they don't really know, I think, what they're getting from Republicans. Am I going to get, someone like a Joe Kent who, is further to the right, or am I going to get a moderate Republican? I think there is such a thing as a party being too big, and you could have someone like a Liz Cheney in the same party as a Marjorie Taylor Greene, and there's so much daylight between those two people that if you're a voter who's trying to decide, it's like, well, I don't know even what it means to be a Republican anymore. I think the Republican Party needs to define itself, but also get back to its core principles. Limited government should be a very popular selling point for people, especially after the pandemic era restrictions, while people are strapped financially. I think if you can focus on crime and justice, the economy, limited taxation, small government, get back to the core principles of the Republican Party and forget all this other bullshit that's just distracting people about stolen elections, etc. I think that would be beneficial, at least in Washington state, for Republicans, where even the Republican base tends to skew towards the middle a little bit, comparatively speaking, with the rest of the country. So again, we'll see what happens in the 3rd Congressional District. We'll see if Joe Kent can make up ground here in a final ballot drop. I believe there are about 45,000 ballots in Clark County we're waiting on, so there's certainly enough for Joe Kent to make up the deficit, but I don't know at this exact moment whether he will. That's it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you so much for being here. And this whole time, I've had a friend, he's so nervous. So before you come over, it's Veterans Day. So a big thank you to all the veterans out there who have served our country. And it just so happens, my friend Daryl, just peek your head over here, Daryl. You got your hat on, too. He's so my friend Daryl, who we've been friends for what, like 10 years?
Over 10 years.
Yeah, was in the Navy with one of my best friends from college and is now living in the Seattle area and what was your job in the Navy? Interior communications electrician. So he's really good at all this tech stuff. So actually Daryl's been here at the studio for the past 2 days putting his what he learned in the military to good use and revamping our whole podcast setup, which it's looking awesome. We're gonna have a new ability to have people in studio, more in-person interviews as opposed to Zooms, which will be really awesome. So thank you, Daryl, for spending time here, doing things, and thank you for your service to our country. All right, that's it for today's episode of Undivided. If you have not become a subscriber already, please do so at patreon.com/undivided or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Again, thanks for your commitment to giving Common Sense a comeback. It turns out that is a mission that we still need to continue, so continue it we shall. I'll see all of you on Monday. That was fun.